This art truck, already overloaded due to its weight, had a tire give out because the owner overloaded it slightly more. The truck is now stranded on the side of the road, so the owner quickly contacted professional repair specialists for help. After disassembling the rear axle, it's clear that the axle tube has been repaired numerous times and fractured again. Given the severely cracked axle, it can't be repaired on-site. The entire rear axle must be disassembled and sent to an old-school repair shop. The heavy differential was removed during the disassembly to reduce the rear axle's weight. With this type of single-point suspension, where no bolts are securing the rear axle, they need to remove a few rods that hold it in place, and they can easily remove the entire axle. They then arrange for a small truck to transport the rear axle to the old-school repair shop. To ensure the repair held up, they also took the axle to Uncle Glass's workshop in Peshawar for further repairs. To make the fractured area more solid, Uncle Glass's repair method wasn't just to weld the broken part directly. Instead, they used an electric arc to burn and remove the fractured section of the axle tube. After a discussion, they decided to machine the fractured part on a lathe. Using a four-jaw chuck to hold the axle tube in place, the technician used a scraper for alignment and found the center point. Meanwhile, another technician found a steel pipe to reinforce the axle tube and used an old-fashioned saw machine to cut it. To ensure better weld adhesion, they machined a beveled groove at the fracture point for additional welding surface. Since the saw machine was already cutting the reinforcement pipe, they also needed to remove the positioning tube inside the axle tube. The saw machine finished cutting the steel pipe for reinforcement, but because its size didn't perfectly match the inner diameter of the axle, the technician had to trim it. They cut a notch into the pipe with a tool, and then used a small hammer to compress it to the correct size. The technician welded the cut section to strengthen the steel pipe and used an angle grinder to smooth any uneven areas. To fit the pipe into the axle tube, they further machined the surface of the pipe, ensuring it was smooth and flat. Conversely, the technician bored a hole into the tube to fit the steel pipe to the axle tube. Since there weren't any precise measurements, the technician cut the hole by feel. After measuring and comparing, the hole was finally done. Using a small hammer, they inserted the steel pipe into the axle tube and then welded it to ensure the joint was secure. After welding, the technician chamfered the end of the steel pipe with a lathe to properly align it with the axle. Once that was done, the axle tube could be installed back into the rear axle. With the pipe adequately aligned, the technician used a large hammer to drive the tube into position. Once they measured the tube with a caliper to confirm the length was accurate, they checked the concentricity of the axle and the rear axle. If the axle isn't correctly aligned, even slight misalignment will cause uneven tire wear, and in extreme cases, the tires could bounce while driving. After adjusting the misalignment with a hammer, the technician welded the joint, tapping with a hammer to correct any misalignment before welding it fully. Given this technician's high welding skills, the process was completed quickly. After finishing, the uneven welds were carefully smoothed with an angle grinder. With the grinding done, the cracked rear axle was successfully repaired. How much do you think a repair like this should cost in rupees?